This Shabbos was Shabbos Nachamu. Nachamu, of course, means consolation. And it's the Shabbos after Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, of course, is all about the destruction of the temples, basically, and the mourning that is required of it. And then the Shabbos afterwards is called Shabbos Nachamu, because we read the Haftarah Nachamu Ami Yirmeh Elokechem, where the Rabbi Kessin says in the Navi, be consoled, says your God. That's how it starts. And of course, therefore, we are in Shabbos Nachamu, which was this Shabbos. I thought it would be very appropriate to talk about Nachamu, really Nechama. What is the real consolation of the Jewish people? And really, I can start off, there's a very beautiful medrash in this parsha, in the Haftarah of Nachamu, where it says that at the end of time, Necesarrily, which are the Jewish people, Necesarrily means the totality of the Jewish people, they will, at the end of time, the Rabbi Shalom will approach them, and Necesarrily means the Jewish people will say, why did we have to go through it all this? We're talking about thousands of years of galus, exile. But it's not just the exile of the last 2,000 years, even the 2,000 years preceding, from the time of Avraham Avinu, Abraham, until the the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. All of this has been accompanied by tremendous amount of destruction, desolation, and suffering, enormous. You're talking about the Roman occupation, before that with the Assyrians and the Greeks, and the Jews have been the subject of tremendous suffering for 4,000 years. That's a long time on the scale of man's history. And of course, for the last 2,000 years, the Jews have been subject to enormous persecution, anti-Semitism. We're looking at Christianity, the persecutions of Christianity and the slaughter by Jews of Christians, especially in the form of the Inquisition.
The slaughter by Christians of
what?
Jews?
The slaughter of Jews by Christians. And we're looking especially at the pogroms. We're looking at the Inquisition. We're looking at the persecutions, the expulsions of Jews from nations like the 1492, the expulsions of the Jews from Spain, which is clearly because of, I think it's Torquemada, if I'm correct historically, and so on, and then of course we're talking about Holocaust. And of course, without the Christian climate of denigrating and degrading Jews, Hitler, Yamach Shemoy, could never have gotten away. I've read a lot of literature about that. And because of 2,000 years of constant degradation and victimization of the Jewish people, that's why Hitler was able to get away with what he did, because everybody wanted to do that, really. And there's always latent anti-Semitism, and even in America, we see now more. And forget about the Arabs. I mean, we're not even talking about the anti-Semitism of the Arabs and the nations of Europe. It's beyond belief how the people hate the Jews. And what is so remarkable about that, when you think about that, is that if you took away every contribution to civilization that the Jews gave the world, this world will revert back to the cavemen. And if you revert, I don't know if it started from the cavemen, which obviously it didn't. It started from Adam Rishon, but figuratively speaking, this place would look like the cavemen, Neanderthals, crawling around the world and so on. They would have nothing if you took away the contribution of what the Jewish people have given. So you'd think that the world would be incredibly thankful for the existence of the Jew. Instead, they're always looking ways to destroy Jews, to heap abuse, tremendous amount of denigration and degradation on the Jewish people. So it's astounding when you think about that. And someday they have no idea what their payment will be, that God ultimately will seek retribution. And you can see that from the Navi, what the Rebbe Hashem says, that he's going to crush them because of, in terms of what they did. And it's just incredible. They have no idea what is going to happen to them. All of them, whether it be Europe and the Arabs and so on. But anyway, so therefore at the end of time, the Rebbe Hashem says, Knesset Yisrael, which is the Jewish people, at the end of time, I mean really at the end of time, after in the Messianic era, where the Jews will be refused to be consoled, because we cannot forget the 4,000 years of incredible, hideous torture and persecution by the non-Jews and so on. So what the Rebbe Hashem will do, he's going to send Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, he's send the others, patriarchs, to go console the Jews. And it says in the Medrash that they will go, and each one tries to console the Jews, and the Jews say forget about it, we're not interested. And then he sends Moshe Rabbeinu, and he sends Aaron HaKohen, forget about it. And then he sends Shmuel Hanavi. He sends a who's who in Judaism to try to console the Jews, and nobody succeeds. And so the Rebbe Shalom says, God says, I will go and console them, because I'm the only one that can do that. And that's how this parsha begins. Nachamu, Nachamu, be consoled, be consoled. God is talking to the Jewish people. Yomer Elokechem, says God. God is talking to them. And he says, be consoled. And they are consoled. The question is, what does he do that they couldn't do? You see, okay, God is infinite in terms of his ability to persuade and speak. But we're talking about the patriarchs, we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, they couldn't console the Jews. So the question is, what does the Rebbeinu Shalom do more than anybody else, that he is successful? The second question you can ask is, why does it have a double lashon? Nachmu, be consoled, be consoled. Why does he say it twice? We know God doesn't stutter. So why would he have to say it twice? He just has to say, be consoled, and that's all. And another question is, why does it say, Yom Elokechem, says your God, and the word that they use to describe God is Elokim, which is God in terms of his attribute of justice as a judge. It really should say Yomer Hashem, with the attribute of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the four-letter name of God, which is mercy. Be consoled, because God's going to show them the mercy of what he has done and so on. In any case, these are the questions you can ask from the Medrash. So that's the question. What is the true consolation of the Jewish people that they have suffered for thousands of years? Now I'm going to bring down a well-known Gemara in Makkas. At the end of Makkas, two interesting Gemaras, which I'm going to learn with you, together. And we're going to try to understand them at a certain level of depth. And you'll find that in the end, especially the second event, really explains what the concept of Nechama is. And that's really the Nechama of the Jewish people. And it answers many questions, as you will see. So the first story is, Ukvahoyu Rabbi Gamliel, the great Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, famous, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, and of course Rabbi Akiva. Right? All four of them. It means these are the greatest sages of Israel in their time. Mahalchin b'derech, they were walking on the way. They happened to be in Italy, because you'll see, near Rome. And then it says, V'shamu, and all four of them heard, Koil hamoina shel roimi, mipalta barochoi. They heard the voice of the crowds of Rome. Where mipalta, from the palace, depending on how you want to learn the mipalta, from the palace of Rome. Barochok. And where was Rome, where in terms of where they were? Me'av Esra mil, 120 mil. It's a question of how long is a mil is, but it's at least 50, 60, 70 miles away. And they heard this tremendous ruckus noise. Now, obviously you can't hear something 60, 70 miles away. But what it does mean is that they heard the voice means as they were walking through the towns and the villages of Italy, right, they could see the incredible success, the security, the success, and the calmness of the Italian countryside. And of course it was all rooted in Rome, because Rome was the empire, right? Okay, what happened? And they began to cry, because they saw what this incredible difference between the Jews' mazel and the Goyim mazel, especially Rome, you see. So they began to cry. Who? Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Yeshua. But it says Rabbi Akiva Mesachek. Rabbi Akiva wasn't crying. He was, I don't know if Mesachek means laughing or smiling, whatever it was. He was not doing what they were doing. Let's say he was smiling. Okay? So they looked at him, so they said to him, Mesachek, why are you smiling? I mean, we're taking a look at the incredible difference between the mazel, the luck of Jews and the luck of Rome, So he said to them, why are you crying? Interesting, a Jew answers a question with another question, right? Maybe this is where it comes from. But in any case, he asked them, why are you crying? So they said to him, Halolu kushim, these goyim, shemishtachvam le'atzovim, that they bow to idols, right? Umekatrim le'avodas kachobim, right? And they offer incense to avodah zarah. Yoishvin, they are sitting, they are dwelling, betach v'hashgate, they're secure and they're calm, tremendous, at peace, right? V'anachnu, right? V'onu, and we, beis hadoim ragli elokim, the footstool of God is soruf, bo'esh, is burnt in fire, which is of course the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. This was after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, right? So they were saying that these goyim, bo'esh really nifke, and we shouldn't cry. What they said to him is, these people are in tranquility and they're calm, right? And they have tremendous success. The goyim, right, of Rome and so on, Rome, they are, they're having tremendous success and flourishing. Their civilization flourishes, and our Beis Hamikdash, which is the footstool of God, where the divine presence used to be, right, is destroyed and burnt. We shouldn't cry in looking at this incredible contrast. So Amolahen, so Rabbi Akiva said to these three, Lokachani Mesachek, and that's why I am laughing or smiling. And here's what Rabbi Akiva says: Umali over kach. If this is the way God behaves or rewards those people who violate and rebel against Him and transgress, right? Those people who do His will, how much more will He reward these people with incredible amount of reward, tranquility and prosperity and so on. So that's the first story. The question is, what does this story really mean? Okay, let's take a look, and then you have the second story, which is fascinating. Right? So you had these four people walking in Rome, or outside of Rome actually, about 70, 80 miles from Rome, whatever the distance is. And they're walking along the countryside, which is, the places, the villages and so on. And they just see it's incredible security, tranquility, success, in every which way you can imagine, right? And with us, right, Eretz Israel, it's all taken by the Romans. The Beis Hamikdash is burnt, destroyed, the footstool of God, they call it, right? Because it's sort of like God puts His feet on the Beis Hamikdash, and that's where He resides, right? And that's burnt. So we shouldn't cry. What bothered them, or what concept were they focusing on? And the answer is the transfer, as I mentioned last week, of the sparks of holiness to the other side. That's what it is. That the Jews, if you remember what I said last week, that when the Jews sinned, then the Satan is able to take from these sparks of holiness, right? And he uses it to give to the Goyim, so that they should destroy, and more accurately, they should try to get the Jews to sin, so the Satan can grow an enormous amount of strength, right? And that's the transfer. See, when the Jews sin, then the Satan gets it, and the non-Jews. And when the Jews do mitzvahs, then they get the enormous power of Kedusha, holiness, right? And the other side begins to diminish. So what they're commenting on is a tragedy that we have lost. Remember, I mentioned this last week in the Tisha shir, that the Jews are privy to two specific gifts. And we say that in the brachos in the morning, right? We say, Oize Yisrael b'gvura. He girds, he surrounds Israel, Jews, with tremendous strength. And the next bracha is, Oiti Yisrael b'sifara. He crowns Israel with Tiferes beauty. And I mentioned what that is. Those are the two gifts, because that's what the Shekhinah has. The Shekhinah has Tiferes and Oiz. What is that? Tiferes is incredible chokhmah, wisdom. And Oiz is hatzlocha and might. Those are the two ingredients that will do everything for you, right? So therefore, the Jews have that. They have Tiferes and Oiz, right? But instead what happened? The Tiferes and Oiz, which the Jews used to have, was transferred to the Satan, and now this Tiferes and Oiz is what the Romans have, the Goyim, you see, and the Beis Hamikdash of the Jews destroyed, and they have the Tiferes and Oiz, they have the beauty and the might, and the Hatzlach, the success, you see. So they were bemoaning the transfer what we used to have to the other side, which is tragic, obviously. And I mentioned the Pasuk, which we say in Tachnun every morning, Ad Mosai Uscho Bashvi. How long will your Uscho, will your might, success, power, Bashvi, be in captivity, which means the other side, the non-Jews, right? V'sif'atcha, and your beauty bi'atzo, and your beauty in the hands of the enemy, because it's in captivity in the hands of the enemy, and they use it against the Jewish people, obviously, to get them to sin. So therefore, if they do, then the Satan can nourish off the more Kedusha of the Jewish people, you see. So this is what they were bemoaning. The fact that, and crying about, the fact that there's been this incredible transfer from the gifts of the Jewish people, which is what the Shekhinah has, okay? And this has been transferred to the Goyim. You see? So that's an incredible tragedy, and so on. But Rabbi Akiva was different. Rabbi Akiva he didn't look at the transfer or the desolation of the Jewish people. He looked at what the Goyim had, and from that he derived a tremendous Nachamu, consolation. You see the difference? They were focusing on what we lost. He was focusing on what the Goyim got, and in that itself is a Nachamu. What was the Nachamu? Because of these people, right, who worship idols, who do in many ways terrible things, right? They worship idols, as it says here, right? And they bow down and offer incense and so on, and they tremendously transgress and violate, rebel against God. If God rewards them, because they are deserving of reward at some level, right? What does that show you? That's the concept of midas tuvoy, that the attribute of God in terms of His goodness is incredible. That doesn't make a difference, even if you worship idols, right? And you're terrible. You're a real sinner, and you're a real Rasha, evil man. If you deserve the reward, then you get the reward. It doesn't cancel out. So what Rabbi Akiva said, and take a look at the Romans. They're living a life, a great life, right? So that demonstrates the incredible midah, measure, or characteristic of God, that if you deserve it, you get it, right? Even if you're an incredible Rasha, how much more so are the Jews who do the will of God, right? Who worship God, do the rule, basically, I mean they sin also, but basically they do the will of God, they do the mitzvahs. How much more so will God repay them and reward them for what they have done? You see? So it's interesting. They looked at the tragedy, the desolation and the loss and the destruction, and therefore they cried. But Rabbi Akiva was always into looking for the good, which is interesting. You see, He's known for that, which I'll comment on that. And therefore, he would look at the actual, not the loss, but actually what is happening, and he would realize, that this is an incredible demonstration of the incredible characteristics of the Ribono Shel Olam. That if they are rewarded, even though they're terrible, how much more so will the Jews be rewarded at the appropriate time, you see. So in that very event, he was able to look at consolation, which means that eventually God will, of course, reward the Jews and restore their greatness. This is Rabbi Akiva. And we know Rabbi Akiva would always do this because his Rebbe was Nachamu Ish Gamzu, very famous person, Nachamu Ish Gamzu. His name was Nachamu Ish Gamzu, a man that used to say Gamzu l'Toiva. This also would be for the good. So they nicknamed him Nachamu Ish, a man, Gamzu, that's always saying Gamzu l'Toiva. This also will be for the good. It was what Nachamu Ish Gamzu always saw, that everything is always for the good, ultimately, you see. And Rabbi Akiva was his student. And in fact, the famous statement of Rabbi Akiva is, Kol milsa di ovid rachmano, everything that God does, the tav of it is only for the good. So therefore, he would look at the actual event, which seems terrible, and he would see the good in it, you see. So in that way, he was able to derive a tremendous consolation.
His own life story, how he became Rabbi Akiva.
Yeah.
Has to do with this. It's the same optimism.
Yeah, well, you mean the water dripping on the...
Yeah. I mean, how we turn around.
That's right. Yeah. So this is one story, in terms of what a consolation is. That sometimes you have to look at the event itself. Forget not only the loss and the tragedy, because if you look at that, you'll be doing what they did, right? And you'll be crying. But if you look at what is the actual event, which is so disturbing, then in that event itself, that reveals a tremendous nechama. And that's what Rabbi Akiva was able to take out of that. Then there's another story. This story is really a classic. And from here is the answer why God can console the Jews and nobody else could do it, which I had mentioned in Medrash. Here's the story. Shuv, again, Pamachas, one time they were oil in Yerushalayim, they went to Jerusalem. They're out of Rome, right? And they're back in Israel, and they're walking in Jerusalem. Kivin Shegilahab Ahar Tzofim, right? If you ever remember the Har Tzofim, the Hebrew University is up there, but the view, it's called Tzofim because it overlooks. You could see. Tzofim means to see. It's an incredible view of the old city, not just of the whole Har HaBayis. If you ever go to Israel, make sure you go to Har Tzofim, which, by the way, the Hebrew University is Har Tzofim, and Hadassah Medical Center is also, I think, Har Tzofim. But there's a view there which is incredible. You can see the whole, the Har HaBayis, you see the mosque, and you see the whole wall. It's an incredible view of the old city. Anyway, that's why it's called Har Tzofim. So they reached this Har Tzofim, right? Then it says Korah Bigdehem. So they witnessed the destruction, because it was destroyed, obviously, and they rent their garments, in terms of Avedis. Kivin Shehigiu Lahar HaBayis, right? Then they kept going, and then they actually walking toward the Beis HaMikdash, the Har HaBayis. So it says Ro Shul. They saw a fox. Sheyotz mi Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's astounding. There was a fox that came out of the Holy of Holies. You can imagine what that is? An animal. He was living in the Holy of Holies, right? So what happened? So they started crying, obviously. A fox coming out of that. This was the Holy of Holies, where an angel couldn't even go into that place, right? And if a human went in, not on the time of Yom Kippur, or he was Kohen Gadol, he died, right? So what's now? It's not only is it not the Beis HaMikdash, and humans don't even live there. It's animals that live there. Could you imagine the utter desolation and degradation of the holiest place on the planet, and of course probably the universe? So what happened? They started crying. Again, Same idea. And what was time Rabbi Akiva? Mitzachek. He was either smiling or laughing, whatever. I don't think he was laughing, but he clearly was smiling, So, similar conversation. So they said to him, why are you smiling? And this is not even Rome where the Kedusha of the Jews were transferred to the Romans, right? This is the Beis HaMikdash, right? Where in utter destruction, desolation. Why are you smiling? So Rabbi Akiva said to them, why are you crying? Same idea as before, right? So they said to him, Mokum shekosev boy, this place, the Pasuk says about it, V'hazor hakorev yumos, that anybody who's a non-Kohen, if he enters this place, he's dead. He dies, right? V'achshav shualim holchu boy, and now we see foxes coming out of this place. Right? Remember what I said? Not only is it not the Beis HaMikdash, but it's not even habitable by man. Animals are living there. And we shouldn't cry. So Omar Lahen, so he said to him, again, this is why I am smiling. Why? So he brings a pasuk. It says in Yeshayahu, V'o'ido li, and God is saying, I will bring to me witnesses, Edom Nemonim, true witnesses, who, Uriah HaKohen, I'm going to bring Uriah HaKohen, who prophesied in the first Beis HaMikdash that the Beis HaMikdash would be destroyed. V'Zechariyahu ben Yiverech Yohu, and Zechariah prophesied in the second Beis HaMikdash, right, that there would be a redemption. I'm going to bring both of them to testify. So Rabbi Akiva says, "V'chima inyan Uriah Exile Zechariah." Why does God want to bring two witnesses? One who flourished, who lived in the Beis HaMikdash Rishon, and he prophesied about the destruction, and one who lived in the second Beis HaMikdash, right? And he prophesied about the ultimate redemption. Elo, right? Why mention these two people as witnesses? Elo, Torah Kosev Nuvuoso Shel Zechariah. The pasuk makes the prophecy of Zechariah, which is about the redemption, the Geula, b'nevuoso shel Uriah. It makes the redemption dependent on the destruction. By Uriah, it says, as a pasuk, Lochem beglalchem tzion sodet techoresh. Because of your sins, Zion will be plowed like a field. That's the destruction. And by Zechariah, it says, O Yeshu Zekenim Uzekenois, there will yet be old men and old women in the streets of Jerusalem. That's the redemption. That's ultimately what's going to happen. So Rabbi Akiva continues, actually in Iskaimo Nuvoso Shel Arya, until the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, which is the destruction, I would say I would say that if it wasn't destroyed, right, then the nevuah of redemption will not be fulfilled. But now I see that Uriah was right, that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. It definitely will happen. That the prophecy of Zechariah will be fulfilled, which means that there will be a redemption. That's what he's saying. So B'loshen hazeh omuloi. So the Gemara says, in this expression is what they said to him. Akiva nichamtonu, Akiva, you have consoled us. Akiva nichamtonu, Akiva, you have consoled us. That's the Gemara. Very interesting Gemara. Okay? So it would seem that what Rabbi Akiva was consoling them is that, listen, the redemption will occur, and someday it'll be great, and that's why I'm smiling. But this Gemara is a very difficult Gemara to understand. Let's go back to the beginning of this Gemara, and you'll see the questions. Okay? If you really think about it. Again, at one time they were going to Jerusalem. When they got to the Har Tzofim, right, they rent their garments. And when they got to the Har Bayis, they saw a fox coming out of the Beis HaMikdash. You see? Who cares what came out of the Beis HaMikdash? Was it a fox? porcupine. Like, what's the big deal about a fox, that the Gemara has to say, by the way, it was a fox. It should have just said, hey, it was an animal that came out of this place. Do I care if it was a fox or not? Okay? So they started crying. Rabbi Akiva was smiling, right? So they said to him, what are you smiling about? So he said, well, why are you crying? So I don't understand that. I can't understand why they asked him why you're smiling, because that's inappropriate. Why is he asking them, well, why are you crying? It's obvious why they're crying. That's why we mourn, we cry on Tisha B'Av. What's the question here? Their question was appropriate. His question doesn't make sense. Why are you crying? What do you mean, why are you crying? Of course you cry. And what Rabbi Akiva hold? You don't have to cry, right? You don't have to mourn because there will be a redemption. So what do we have Tisha B'Av for? What do we need it for? Let's all sit down and smile on Tisha B'Av like Rabbi Akiva. You see what I'm saying? So what does all this mean? What in the world is Rabbi Akiva saying? And so on. Yeah, so the question is, and not only that, why again is he answering a question with another question? You know what I'm saying? What is he doing that for, right? Remember the old joke, where a Jew is on the stand, right, and the lawyer and the prosecutor is always is asking this guy, right, and the Jew keeps answering with a question. The prosecutor says, "Well, did you see it? Well, what do you think?" And the guy continuously is answering all the prosecutor's question, right, with another question. So finally the judge is irritated, and he looks at the guy and says, "Excuse me, you understand, you're the defendant. Why are you always answering the prosecutor's question with another question?" So the Jew looks at him and says, "Why not?" Anyway, so that's the question. Why is he asking these questions? It's obvious why they're crying. Why is he answering with a question, and so on. And of course he holds that you have to, cry on Tisha B'Av. I mean, Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold on Tisha B'Av. Like, what's that supposed to mean? So they answer him, you asking us why we're crying? So they say, a place that it says that a non-Kohen that goes into this place, he will die, and now foxes are coming out of it. We don't cry? It's obvious. What's Rabbi Akiva's question? So he says to them, therefore I'm smiling. Why? So ultimately what he's saying is that there will be redemption. You see? But what's also a little difficult is to understand is, what do you mean? That the prophecy of Zechariah, which is redemption, depends on the prophecy of Uriah, which is destruction. Well, obviously, if it's not destroyed, how can it be redeemed? What does it mean that the redemption of the Jewish people and the Beis Hamikdash depends on its destruction? It's obvious, you see. So he answers, okay, so until the destruction, I didn't think there would be a redemption. Now that there's a destruction, I know sure there surely will be a redemption. Now that there's a destruction, surely there will be a redemption, a geula, that the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt and so on. So like, what's the chiddush here? Of course there'll be a redemption. Like, what's he informing these people? That there will be a redemption? We know that. So then the Gemara says that Beloshen Hazeh, that the rabbis, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah answered him Beloshen Hazeh in this manner. Why is the Gemara telling us how they answered Rabbi Akiva? Why is that important? So they say, Akiva nichamtonu, Akiva, you have consoled us. Akiva nichamtonu, you have consoled us. What was the consolation? Not only, notice again, they said it twice. Akiva, you have consoled us, and Akiva, you have consoled us. They said it twice, right? Why? Why are they doubling up? Remember I said that the pasuk says Nachamu, Nachamu. Is there some type of connection here? See? So there are many questions that one can ask about this story. I'm trying to understand what is this story really all about? You see. So what we need to do is to go back, and you need to understand the principle. What the principle is this: Let's assume a father is raising a child, right? The kid's a teenager, right? The kid takes for granted everything that the father did. For granted, right? He doesn't listen to the father, right? He rebels against the father, and so on. So what is the father going to do? So the father says, listen, this guy has no understanding of what I do for him, right? So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw him out of my house. You see? And then what's going to happen? He's going to understand exactly what I do for him, and he's going to miss it, and he's going to mourn. And that mourning is necessary for the child to understand what he lost. So it comes out that the mourning that the child has for what he did is what's called the tikkun, rectifies the sin of taking for granted the father. That's the problem. You see, mourning, crying over a loss, is a rectification of what you lost, because you are clearly indicating you know what you lost, you mourn, and that is a tikkun, a rectification, a repair of what you did. And then the father could take back his child and say, okay, you now understand what I do for you, come back into my house. Therefore we see that the loss and the mourning is the tikkun, is the rectification of the sin that caused the destruction of the temple. You see, it's a very important idea. Tisha B'Av is the refuah. The mourning that we undo on Tisha B'Av, the mourning, right? That is the tikkun, the rectification of how to get the Beis HaMikdash back. Because our mourning clearly indicates that we understand what we did, we understand what we lost, you see. And therefore, that enables us and provides us with the way to get back to Beis HaMikdash. Because then the Rebbeinu Shem says, you now understand what you lost, you understand what you did that caused the loss, right? And therefore, since you mourn and you realize what you miss, I will give it to you back. It's the undoing of why it was destroyed in the first place. Very important yesod, you see. So, now with that understanding, now let's go back and revisit the story. And you'll see how everything is answered. Okay? One time, they were walking up to Jerusalem, and when they got to the Har HaTzofim, they rent their clothing. Notice it says koru. They all ripped their clothing. Hey, wait a minute. It's Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva. You see? He was involved in the mourning. You see? So, of course, Rabbi Akiva realizes that Tisha B'Av is for mourning. Right? When you see the Beis HaMikdash destroyed, of course, what it means is that you need to cry and mourn, and that is the tikkun. So he was involved with that. You see? Then it says they got to the Har Bayis, and they saw a fox coming out. What do we care if it's a fox? Because a fox is known as what? As a sly creature. A fox is known as a tremendously, that's the reputation of a fox, very cagey, very bright, very smart as far as animals go. And that's why we say he outfoxed me. Right? That's the origin of the whole concept of that word, he outfoxed me, and so on. So what the Rebbeinu Shem did is interesting. What he did is he prepared the fox that would be the animal that comes out when they approach. Why? Because what the fox is saying, what you see is not what is. The destruction of the temple looks like it's a destruction, but really it's a refuah, it's a tikkun. Because once the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed and you mourn, that is the tikkun. You see, the rectification of your sin, you see, happens through the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And without the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, you people, all of you, would never have rectified the sin. So that's what the symbol of a fox is. You're looking at a destruction. But we know what it really is? It's really the repair. It is really the rectification. That is why it had to be destroyed. So that's why it's a fox. The fox is saying, in a sly way, what you see is not what is. What you're really looking at is the refuah, the cure, the repair, not just the destruction. And now we understand what Rabbi Akiva was saying. So Rabbi Akiva said, so they started crying, and of course he was smiling because he understood what the fox was saying, that this is the tikkun. Without this destruction of the temple, you cannot be redeemed because you're not mourning. You don't recognize what you did. So Rabbi Akiva saw that immediately. So he smiled. You see? So they didn't understand what Rabbi Akiva was doing. So they looked at Rabbi Akiva and said, what are you smiling for? You see? Which was obvious, So he said to them, why are you crying? What do you mean, why are we crying? It's obvious. No. What he was saying is that you don't understand. When you look at the space of English, you're crying. Why are you crying? Because the crying, the Beis Hamikdash, the destruction is meant to do what? Is meant to make you cry, and that is the repair. That's what he meant. That the fact that you people are crying, right, is exactly why this Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So he didn't ask them why they're crying. Of course he knew. But what he said is what? Why are you crying? Because that crying itself will repair the damage of the Beis Hamikdash and bring the redemption. So they said, of course, what are you crying? It says that a non-Kohen goes into it. Of course he will die. And now foxes come out. So he said, Lo kachani metzachek. That's why I'm smiling, because you're crying. So I see that you're doing exactly what has to happen to repair the destruction. And I'm smiling that you guys are doing it. What are you doing? You're crying. I'm witnessing exactly what the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash has to do for you. You see? And you're doing it. You're crying. Crying is the medicine. That's what Rabbi Akiva was really saying. Lo kachani metzachek. Because you're crying, that's exactly why I'm laughing, or I'm smiling, because your crying is the medicine that will bring back the Beis Hamikdash. It's a dialogue where each one understands from their perspective, and they're missing each other. So finally Rabbi Akiva says, okay, I see you're not getting it. Let me go more, okay? And he brings the psukim, where the pasuk says, I will bring Uriah the Kohen as witnesses, and Zechariah, right? So Uriah, Rabbi Akiva says, was in the first place of Mikdash, and he prophesied about the destruction. Zechariah was in the second, and he prophesied about the ultimate redemption. You see, what connection does one have to the other? So here's what Rabbi Akiva said. The Jews sinned, and until the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there would be no tikkun. There would be no mourning, no crying. And you need that to restore the second Beis Hamikdash for the Gula. And that's what he says. If the first Beis Hamikdash, until now I thought that the Beis Hamikdash was not destroyed. So how could there be redemption? Because the sin of the Jews is still here. So without the destruction, which is the medicine, there will be no redemption. But now that I see that the prophecy of the first destruction is true, therefore the medicine is now here, and now I know there will be Gula, because the mourning is the medicine. You see, now that I know that you're taking the pills, I know there will be a redemption. You see, and that's what he told them. Rabbi Akiva said, of course, he didn't tell them that there will be a redemption. Of course everybody knows there is a redemption. But what he said is that the whole meaning of the Churban bias was only as a medicine, that they should mourn, cry, and that will be the refuah to bring the redemption. So they said to him, and that's why the Chazal say, Beloshen Hazeh. So the rabbis answered Rabbi Akiva in this expression, which is the exact same expression as the Posuk. Be consoled, my people. That's why they're saying this. What was that? Because what did God do? What's the main consolation that God does? How did he do it? None of the others. Moshe and Aaron, all the Nevi'im, they couldn't do it. Why? Because all they could say to the Jews is that, don't worry, the redemption will be over. It's over. And that, of course, is a tremendous consolation. But a guy said, but why did I have to go through this? They couldn't answer that. Nobody knows why. You see, it's like, like in Cuba, Castro used to put guys in prison, political prisoners, for no reason. There were guys there for 25 years because they opposed that Russia, you see. So imagine one day the door opens and the guy walks out. So of course there's a tremendous consolation, the fact that he can walk out and he's free. But why did I spend 25 years behind bars for nothing? How do you console a person for that? So the Ovis, Moshe, they couldn't console in terms of why. They can just say it will be over and it's over. Okay, thank God for that. But the Jewish people, what they were really saying is, okay, we know it's over. Why did we have to suffer for 4,000 years? Nobody can answer that. Only the Rabbi Hashem can answer that. And that's why the Pasuk says, Nachamu, Nachamu. Right? It says in the Pasuk, Nachamu, be consoled, which means that your galus, your suffering will end, and then Nachamu, be consoled, because I'm going to tell you why you needed it. That this was the medicine, and without that, you could never be redeemed. You see. And therefore, Nachamu means be consoled that you will have a gula, redemption. And Nachamu, be consoled, the second language, right? That I will tell you exactly why you were in exile, suffering. And what you realize is that the first concept of suffering, and that it was over, was purely for the necessity of being able to redeem you in the first place. That was the medicine. So then a person understands, you mean, if I didn't suffer, if I didn't have the destruction of the temple, I could never be redeemed? Yes, because that destruction and suffering is the vehicle, is the wherewithal that allowed the redemption to take place. And the only one who could say that is God, because he's the only one that knows exactly what he has to do to save the Jews from the sins and so on. And that's why it says Yom Elokechem, says your God, right? And the name it uses is Elokim, which is a judge, because the suffering itself, right, satisfies the judgment. So God, as the judge, had to give them this suffering. So therefore, justice asserts that they deserve to be redeemed. So it was God, as the God of justice, that made sure they would suffer. So therefore, even justice now is satisfied that they deserve to be redeemed. You see, and that's why it says, Yomer Elokechem. And therefore, what they said to Rabbi Akiva, you have consoled us twice. Same way God has consoled the Jewish people. Be consoled that what? That there will be a redemption, which we know, but that the whole concept of a redemption is merely to be a vehicle, a wherewithal, an instrument to arrive at the redemption itself. So that's why they say, Nichamtonu Akiva. Okay, Akiva Nichamtonu. Akiva, you have consoled us again, but that we know, that of course there will be redemption. But you have consoled us again by clearly pointing out that the suffering itself is cause for joy. Why? Because that is what's going to get me out of the problems, you see. And that's why the Gemara says, B'loshen hazeh, to tell you that they are expressing to Rabbi Akiva the exact way that God addressed the Jewish people, which is two expressions of Nechama. Now you understand many things from that, because it says, Exile Yaakov, there's a time of what? Of tremendous problems, difficulties to Yaakov. Umimeno yishvivosheya, and from it he will be saved. So what that means is not that he will be saved, which we know, but because of it, umimeno, and from it, because of the tsaros, you will be saved. You see, the pasuk means something different. And that is why does it say that the Mashiach will be born on Tisha B'Av? Why? Why Tisha B'Av? Why will Tisha B'Av ultimately be a moed, a holiday? Why will it be a time of tremendous joy? It doesn't make sense. Okay, so Tisha B'Av, tremendous destruction, but why should that become joyful? You know? And why should the Mashiach be born then? And the answers you now understand. Because the whole reason why the Mashiach could come is only because Tisha B'Av occurred. Because that is the medicine. And therefore it's not that he will be born on Tisha B'Av, which he may, but that Tisha B'Av will give rise to the Mashiach. Because Tisha B'Av is the Churban is the destruction, it is the suffering, but really it's the refuah, the cure. You see, it's the medicine. And therefore, from that medicine that the Jews have taken and mourned, that is the refuah, and that brings the Mashiach. See, that's what it means, not that he will be born. What it really means is that Tisha B'Av is the wherewithal. If there wasn't a Tisha B'Av, there wouldn't be a redemption. Therefore, Tisha B'Av in and of itself serves as the vehicle that brings the Mashiach. And that is why he's born on that day. It's a whole different understanding. And also, it says, Kol HaMis'abel Ad Yerushalayim, anybody who mourns, right, mourns Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem, the Zoicha V'Roya, Zoicha, he will merit, V'Roya, and he will see, right, as Binyana, the building of Jerusalem. The question is, it should just say, anybody who mourns Jerusalem will see the building of Jerusalem. What do you mean he will merit and then see? Because if you mourn on Tisha B'Av, that's the medicine. That's the merit. And therefore you will see the redemption of Jerusalem. Makes sense. Because if there was no Tisha B'Av, you wouldn't see the redemption. Therefore anybody who partakes in the mourning of the destruction of the temple, right? That is the schus, because that's the refuah, that's the medicine, that's the merit, and therefore he will see the building of Jerusalem. There's also an interesting Napoleon. Napoleon once came, he conquered he was all over the place, Napoleon. But he once went to a shul. He was walking in this town, and he walked by a building that he clearly saw was a synagogue, but he saw it was dark inside. So he had his guys, his soldiers, knock on the door. Is anybody here? Maybe he wanted to visit it, whatever. So all of a sudden he found the whole shul was filled with people, and they were all sitting there on the ground. So he said, "What's going on here?" So, well, today your lights are gone and you're sitting on the ground because today was Tisha B'Av. And they told him, we're mourning for the temple that was destroyed. That's what they told him. So he asked them, he said, wow, when did this happen? Like recently? He said, no, it didn't happen recently. How about 1900 years ago, 1800 years ago? He said, I don't believe this. You guys are mourning a building that was destroyed 1,800 years ago? So they said, yes, and we mourn for the destruction, and we look forward to its construction, its building, its resurrection. So he said to them a very interesting thing. He said, I want to tell you something. You guys are still connecting to the past. You mourn now, but what you're really doing is you're still remembering and connecting to the past. That I want to tell you, it will definitely be rebuilt. Because if you guys are still connected to the past, then you're going to do everything in your power to get the base of Mikdash rebuilt again. And that story really answers the question, because it says anybody who mourns Jerusalem, right? Zoicha, it shouldn't say Zoicha will merit, it should Yizkeh. He will merit the future tense, right? And Yira, he will see the destruction of the temple. Why does it say Zoicha, he merits now, and he will see now? Because what that means is somebody who mourns something that happened so many years ago, right? And he still connects to that past, then as far as we're concerned, it definitely will happen. Because it's not like, well, it happened now, forget about it. No, since it lies in your consciousness, it definitely will happen. And therefore, as far as we're concerned, as far as the present, the Jews are concerned, it's happening now. Yeah, our connection itself means it's happening now, not just because it's a refuah, because the Jews will be actively trying to rebuild it. That's an interesting story about Napoleon that actually gives an understanding of why it's in the present tense. Because as long as you're connected to a previous event and never forget it, then it's happening now. This itself will allow you, definitely, that it will again be resurrected and so on, But from all of this, we see really a fascinating concept. And of course, how come Rabbi Akiva could see this and they didn't? Same idea, because Rabbi Akiva was always in the Gamzu L'Tova. Rabbi Akiva could look at a tragedy, and the tragedy itself would give the Nechama, would give the consolation. Because his Rebbe was Gamzu L'Tova, Nochamish Gamzu. He had that what's called in English, he had that cognitive style. Oh, you see, so he was always aware and alert that the real consolation lies in the Churban itself. And that was the fox. Fox is saying, hey, you see destruction, but that's not really what is. What is redemption. That destruction you realize is the redemption, because that's the medicine that will bring the redemption. And that's what Rabbi Akiva said, you see, that the reason why all this sorrows has happened, why? We know it's over, but why? Is because the tsaros is the medicine for the redemption. And if the tsaros didn't happen, you could never be redeemed. Once the Jews hear that, they say, wow, so not only do we understand what it means, we got to thank God that He gave us the medicine. You see? Not only, do we have to be, thank God it's over, but we have tremendous consolation and thank God that He saved us with the destruction, you see, and the tremendous amount of suffering. On the contrary, and only God can provide that nechama. And in the end of time, every Jew will know exactly what happened to him. Even if, like I say, he put his hands in his pocket to feed the meter, instead of coming out with a quarter, he came out with a nickel. Oh, it's a little suffering. It's a little, what he called, a little frustration. Why? Why does that have to happen? Because if you really think about it, why would the Baruch Shem do anything? Why would He create a being and give him frustration, annoyance, anger, right? Or terrible disease, or or bankruptcies, or divorce? Why? The Baruch Shem doesn't do this. The God doesn't do this. So the answer is always, because every single measure of suffering, or whatever, in whatever form it is always the wherewithal to achieve the ultimate redemption. We don't see that. And that is also why it says, Kishem shemavochen al hara, just like you make a bracha on bad, you must make a bracha on good. Reverse. Just like you make a bracha on good, you have to make a bracha on bad. Why? Because as far as God is concerned, there is no bad. It's always good. Because even the bad will ultimately bring you to the good. That's why. It's the same concept over and over again, you see. But the problem is we lack the perspective. We don't see this. To us, it's terrible. And there's so much suffering among the Jewish people today, especially and so on, But 4,000 years of incredible amount of suffering and galus, exile, persecutions, inquisitions, being burned at the stake, concentration camps. Who can understand this? But in some day, when the Mashiach comes, all of this will be explained. And what we realize at that point in time, like I said, is that if this suffering had not occurred, there could be no geula. And that is the ultimate consolation. You see? That without the suffering, there is no redemption, although we don't understand. And that will be the greatest of all the consolations. And that's what God means, Nachamu, Nachamu. Be consoled, it will end. But be consoled, I'm going to explain to you exactly, minute by minute, why things happen to you. And you will realize an awesome principle, that all of this is designed to make sure you are redeemed. That's why it has to happen. You see? So in the end, which is really, when things are incredible, every Jew will look at the Rabban Hashem and say, thank you. Because in the end, they realized that without this, there would be no geula, there's no redemption. And that we see from this beautiful Gemara of Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Akiva sees that it was only the destruction that enabled, from Uriah, when he prophesied, that enabled the redemption itself of Zechariah. And that's what he told these Chazal, that the fact that you cry is a great sign, and that's why I'm smiling, because you guys are doing the medicine. That's why I'm smiling. Interesting dialogue, how each one misunderstood, or rather they misunderstood Rabbi Akiva. And that's a beautiful the concept, what the real concept of why it says Nachmu, Nachmu twice, what the real Nechama of Klal Yisrael is, ultimately. that we will understand, all of us, why every single thing happened. And the real concept is the punchline that if it hadn't happened, we would not be redeemed. We'd never make it to Olam Haba. That's the consolation. Any questions?
So you're saying that the mourning itself and the suffering are both vehicles towards redemption?
Correct, exactly. That's right. Well, the mourning is the suffering. When you mourn, you suffer. It's called grief.
No, but it's more than that. You said it's more specific to the suffering is we don't really understand right now how it matches up, but it looks arbitrary. But the mourning is more show that you want something that you spurned originally.
Yes.
So
yeah.
That's
So but it's associated with tremendous grief.
Right.
Grief is always suffering, Yeah.
In the first episode, when the rabbis were in Rome,
Yeah.
and they were going to Rome, and did they tell Rabbi Akiva they were consoled with that first episode?
No.
So in the second episode,
Because there was no consolation.
they said,
All he said was that if God rewards evildoers, right, then he's going to reward us. Yeah, okay, so he'll reward us someday, right? But right now we're all suffering. There was no consolation in that. It was just an explanation that don't despair. God will ultimately reward you. But the real consolation, but why did you destroy your Beis HaMikdash? You see, that was not answered. Why is this that the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed? Rabbi Kessin never answered that. He just said, look, don't worry, someday it'll be over. But I told you, over is the first Nachamu. Why is the second Nachamu? And Rabbi Akiva never answered the second Nachamu except in the second story. Got it? Anyway.
and in the second story, they were consoled twice. Once for the first story,
No.
and the second.
No, they were in Choma that there will be a redemption, which they knew, but it's always a consolation to hear it again. But the real Chiddush is that is the refuah, is the destruction itself has to happen. Why? Not to enable a redemption, but without the first destruction, right? There's no refuah, there's no medicine. So how could the second happen? You see? And that's why he smiled, because he saw that the medicine was being administered, so to speak. See, but it's the same two concepts as the Pasuk, Nachamu. You see? I got that?
The significance of fox is also mentioned.
Significance of what? Fox. Yeah, so the fox was the sly...
Mentioned also in Yeshayahu, right, that the foxes will be around the rabbis.
That what?
That when the Beis HaMikdash will be destroyed, the foxes will run around the rabbis.
Shulim Holchim.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's Shulam Holchim, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is a new dimension. Because what the fox are, it was very, the fox are tremendous sly. Think that you're going this way, but really they're going that way. But the same idea. You're looking at a chorb, you think that's what it is. No, that's your medicine. It's a classic, idea, and that the symbol of don't necessarily believe what you see is really what is. It's a classic fox, Okay. There you got it. I'm sorry I can't console you. Only the Baruch can console you. But at least you understand the theory of the idea. You see. And it's beautifully illustrated with the Gemara. Beautiful story. So on. Okay. What?
Which Gemara is it?
The end of Makkas.
End of Marcus.
Yeah, it's famous. It's a famous, And that's in the Choma. We should see in the Choma shortly, hopefully. Before Rosh Hashanah, hopefully we'll see in the Choma. I told you there's a tremendous solar eclipse happening, and that's a very good sign.
Are you going there?
Yeah, I plan to go there. Yeah, I got to watch this. But it's an incredible event because 99 years ago, it's not just a total eclipse, but it's still on, by the way? It's not just a total solar eclipse. What's unusual, first of all, a solar eclipse total is a very bad siman for the goyim. That's what it is. Gemara says that. Likui hachamo is a bad siman for the goyim. You see, and the Likoi Chama means an eclipse, okay? But what the unusual thing about this eclipse is will traverse the entire United States. Last time that happened was 1918, right? 100 years ago, whatever. And that's a tremendous thing. So not only will it be some type of upheaval in terms of the Goyim, but I believe even in the United States. Something is going to happen in the United States, I believe, which will be an upheaval of something. Something will be reversed. And we know that this eclipse is happening, of course, August 21st, 2017, which is Rosh Chodesh Elul, because every eclipse is a moilad. If you know, every eclipse really is the new moon, and that's the only time you can ever see a moilad, because the new moon is right in front of the sun. You actually see the moon. I mean, or I should say the absence of the moon, because it's black, and so on, which is Chodesh Elul. So that's very significant. But what I think is something significant will happen, especially to America. It's not America; it's Edom, because Edom is the best of Esav. So something significant, hopefully, will happen to in terms of being very favorable to the Jews. And it could be just like I gave a whole shir on the blue moon. Remember the blood moon? And there was an incredible thing that happened, and I believe it was Trump. He became just totally reversed, so much things in America, but that there will be something significant, I believe, especially to Edom and so on. And the next eclipse, which is even better, will again traverse the United States, but it will go, I think, from somewhere in Alabama. It'll go north in Pennsylvania. So the whole East Coast is going to totality. The path of totality will be over these southern and northern states, going straight up. You see, so there, all I have to do is drive to Pennsylvania, and you can imagine everybody in the East Coast is going to drive to. It's about 100 miles away. But the beauty of that one, that eclipse will happen in April of 2024. Was it 7 years from now? But that eclipse is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So that's something, that something which is favorable to the Jews and not favorable to the Goyim actually will happen Nisan, which is the redemption itself. So there's exciting stuff to look forward to.
Why are you going to see it?
Why am I going to see it? First of all, it's one of the most spectacular cosmic natural events you will ever see. Those people who see it come back and say it was just spectacular, astonishing. Because you see all of a sudden the moon blocked the sun and it becomes twilight, and then you see the corona around the sun. It's spectacular. I mean, it's like something, and there are people who run, it happens every year and a half but it probably happens all over the globe. It can happen in Antarctica, Indian Ocean, but there are people that they're called eclipse chasers. They go to see every one. It's incredible, but the fact that it's so close to the United States, so I'm going to see it because it's spectacular. Why not? Second reason, I'd love to see Edom subdued. I'm going to watch it. Edom, Esav, America in this case, will be tremendously subdued, whatever that means, So that's why I want to go, But it's a small bandwidth. It starts from Oregon and ends in South Carolina, and it's only 70 miles wide. There'll be millions of people watching this stuff, So.
Sure, it'll be on YouTube.
YouTube. I mean, it'll be on TV. This is spectacular. This is an event that happens when 100 years it hasn't happened. Oh yeah, on TV, there'll be every astronomer, everybody's going to be into this, watching this eclipse, photographing it, and so on. So you can watch it on television. It's not the same, but it'll be really a YouTube, internet. It's spectacular. Okay, see you next week. That was my Nachamu shir.